Very few of us have lived in the same house for our entire life. Maybe a few of you have. Others of you have moved over and over again. Do you have any family traditions that take you regularly to the same location? Perhaps you visit the same vacation spot each year or visit the same relative's home for the holidays. Is there a smell that triggers a memory of family traditions? What about items that you see or feel? The fuzzy rug where you wrestle with a cousin. The kids' table that your grandma will never get rid of. The feel of that old wooden table that brings such strong memories of pumpkin pie that you can almost taste them. Between 1971 and 1983, I lived in several different neighborhoods in Northern Virginia. In the summer of 2019, after dropping Kristen and Samuel off at Dulles Airport to go to Kenya, I decided to run by my old stomping grounds. I drove by the townhouse off of Braddock Road that I lived in from 1975 to 1978. It looked very different, much smaller than I remembered. Not surprising since I was only 7 when we moved out of that townhouse. I remembered how I climbed as high as I could up the pine trees, and I could almost smell the sap that always covered my clothes. In my memory, it felt like those trees were deep in the woods, but in reality, they were only a couple 100 feet from my house. I was never far from home. Then I headed to my old home in Lorton, where we lived until 1983. It was a great location as our yard backed up to a park with a playground and a baseball field. I parked the car and walked to the baseball field. I could feel the sting of the baseball slamming into my back from a bad pitch. But it was worth it to stand in the box. For when you connected on the sweet spot of the bat, the ball would sail into the woods. The 3-foot-tall mound of dirt that my friends and I built for jumping bikes was gone, but I could still feel the shocking reverberation in my knees as my bike landed on the ground. Then 5 or 6 bolts simultaneously fell off after I landed. I smiled as I considered some of those great memories. There were also some not so great memories. I wondered, how did those events affect me? Had I grown as a result? Are there still scars that cover wounds I don't want to think about? Maybe. It's funny how returning to these locations triggered so many feelings. When we finished our last lesson in the Bible, God had fulfilled his promise to completely remove the Israelites from the promised land. The destruction was humiliating and horrifying. Still, God left them with a glimmer of hope. The prophet Jeremiah said that this break from the promised land would only last 70 years. Remember, God always keeps his promises. So 70 years passes, and the Israelites are allowed to return home to rebuild. Most of those ripped from their homes had died, but some children who had lived long lives in Babylon were still alive to return home. I wonder what that felt like. Did they have faint memories of epic Passover celebrations under King Josiah? Did they remember the starvation and brutal slaughter of their friends and relatives at the hands of the Babylonians? I also wonder how those born in Babylon felt. Surely they had heard stories passed down about the great nation of Israel. I'm still a couple of decades away from 70. I do not have memories of events as terrifying as those faced by the Israelites during this time. Still, when I return to important places, the memories, good and bad, are sometimes overwhelming. I'm sure the return to Jerusalem was both painful and wonderful. Psalm 126 gives us a window into their experience. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Our mouths were filled with laughter then, and our tongues with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord had done great things for us. We were joyful. Ezra records an interesting perspective. in Ezra chapter 3. But many of the older priests, Levites, and family heads who had seen the first temple wept loudly when they saw the foundation of this temple. But many others shouted joyfully. The people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shouting from that of the weeping, because the people were shouting so loudly. I believe that God wants us to remember and feel emotions that are tied to locations and events from our past. It's okay to feel sentimental sometimes. Remembering can help us feel connected to family. It can help us be thankful for what God has done. Both happy and painful memories can motivate us to continue growing. But is there a line we shouldn't cross? What if the Israelites' emotional ties to the location of the temple only caused them to miss the building? What if in essence they worshiped the location instead of God? What if we put too much emphasis on land, property, or buildings? Can we think fondly of experiences while missing the very essence of why God allowed us to have those experiences in the first place? What about our church building? If it were taken away, would it change the promises of God in the slightest? Of course not. Would it change the truth of the Bible? Obviously, the answer is no. But think about the feelings you have that are connected to our church property. As wonderful as those feelings may be, ask yourself this. Do you love the presence of God, wherever that may be granted to you, more than any piece of property? Remember, your ultimate goal in life is to glorify God, to worship God. The appearance of morality, purity, obedience, and success are not our goals. Our goal is to help each other grow in authentic worship. As we enjoy our experiences, let's focus on using what we have been given to point our friends and family to the great treasure, God Himself.